Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon and good evening to you all, whether you're here now or you are watching later. I'm really, really excited to talk about this work today. I'm a big fan of beginning at the very beginning and breaking things down very simply so that we can expound, so that we can develop, so that we can begin to dive into um, what I believe is an art form and a science that requires us to go deeper still, that it's not stagnant in any way. Um, yeah, I'll dive a little bit deeper into that as we go as well. So today, I'm going to be reading sections from the first chapter of my book on reflexology, but I'll really be oscillating between reading and commenting, expounding, asking questions. Because even as I started writing this book a few years ago, as we change, or as there's a wonderful quote by a poet, Charles Bukowski, actually, and the part of the poem that comes to mind is something like, truth changes as men change, and when truth becomes stable, men will become dead, and the insect and the fire and the flood will become truth. So this idea of the evolution of reflexology, or the evolution of a practice, or the evolution of my being is completely dependent on me continuing to have thoughts and feelings in every moment and continuing to dive into whatever it is I'm looking at. So in this case, it'll be reflexology. So we begin at the beginning, though, the basic stuff. What is reflexology? How does it work? What are the benefits? Are there any? A little bit of history. And then we're just going to touch on the mapping system. The mapping system is going to be a longer class that we'll do together. It'll probably be 2.5 hours. But I want to give you a taste because it really is, it's what I speak of when I speak about that unfolding, that expounding, that deepening of something. You could think of it like, if you're familiar with like Aristotle, for instance, or Newton or Newton's law, these ideas that the reason why something ceases to be or doesn't continue to develop is because we see it as something finite. Somebody told me reflexology is this, and it's composed of these things, and it's only these techniques. And we kind of stop there. And so my curiosity then becomes, what if we don't stop? What if we continue to dive in and start to look at the mapping system and reflexology in general as something that has infinite properties? And in this way, it becomes quite philosophical as well. So this is also where we'll end today, and take into our dreamland for those of you who are in the UK and across the pond. All right, so we're going to start with the rudimentary stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up a PDF of this document. So I'm going to begin at the very beginning, and intermittently I'll stop. We'll open it up. I would love to hear questions, ideas, insights, what you're thinking as we move through this stuff as well. Okay. All righty. All right, so chapter 1, it is titled Understanding Reflexology. What is reflexology? Very, very basic. Reflexology is a non-invasive technique. It helps support the body's natural healing process by applying pressure to specific points and areas on the hands, feet, and ears. Reflexology targets every system, gland, organ, and area. Oh, and aids in the detection and the reduction of tension and stress, promotes relaxation, enhances detoxification, and helps improve circulation. There are 3 national associations in the United States that agree on the following definition. Reflexology is an integrative health practice, maps a reflection of the body predominantly on the feet, hands, and outer ears. It uses unique manual techniques to deliver pressure to neural pathways, assisting the body to function optimally. Those 3 associations are, just so you know, are the ARCB, the American Reflexology Certification Board, RAA, which is Reflexology Association of America, and NCRE, which is the National Council for Reflexology Educators. I do want to note that I have noticed on the sites, there includes, and this is where I really want you to start thinking and where I'm going to be thinking too, it includes reflexology technique nomenclature, right? So it actually will say, we'll use, I think it's something like thumb walking, rotation on the point, hook and back up. It'll actually state names. So my question for you, as you begin to think, what is the definition of reflexology? If I were to define it, if I were to put it in my words, not just what I've heard before or what I learned in school, how would I define it? Would I use nomenclature? I have a technique called stirring the soup, right? I don't need that written in any kind of book necessarily, right? Because it's something that was organically developed through me that helped me better access a client's nervous system. Therefore, I use it and I teach it in some of my classes. So is it limiting if we put names on something? Perhaps there are reflexologists that never use hook and back up or rotation on the point, or perhaps never even use thumb walking. Do we define reflexology by the technique? So that's my question for you today. Go ahead and scribble down some ideas on that. And when we open it up in a little bit, I want to hear what you think. Is reflexology, is it defined by the techniques we use? Okay. So reflexology, I'll expound a little bit more. Sorry, I'm distracted. There are new kitties on the land I live on. There are 3 new kitties. So my cat's over here. This is a total digression, but it just like warms my heart. My cat is by the door and she is just very excited about these new kitties in the neighborhood. Okay, back on track. Reflexology is perhaps, oh, I'm going to admit somebody. Someone just came in. Reflexology is a technique where we apply pressure to areas on the hands and feet. Sometimes we utilize maps on the face, the ears. These areas are confined within a mini map. That mini map is a reflection, a smaller version of a larger map that is one's body. Like an architect will create, an architect will create a small model that is preferably to scale of a larger building. Our mini map is a model of the entire body with every organ, gland, internal and external structure. Everything resides here. So if this is my left hand, this is a replica of the left side of my body. Okay. Now I want to just stop briefly because I asked some questions and I want to kind of get a feel for where you are today. What do you think? What do you think about what I said? What do you think about what reflexology is? Is it more? Are there ideas or insights or possibilities that I didn't mention? And is it defined by a technique? Anything you want to speak to? And you could just unmute yourself and ask or type it in the chat. It's philosophical, right? It's not easy to respond to. I'm putting you on the spot. I mean, we think about this stuff intermittently, but suddenly somebody asks and it's like, holy moly. So I'm going to be quiet for just 30 seconds more. We'll continue to go on and we'll continue to ponder as we move through other topics. So it can land later. It can come up later. We can talk about it later. But I'll be quiet for just a few moments more to think about, is reflexology defined by the technique we use? What is reflexology to you?
So Chantel, I have a theory. I mean, I would not think that reflexology is defined by the technique, except for that when I think of massage, when there's a comparison between reflexology and massage, because I think my own personal experience has been that the technique of reflexology where you're actually, you're not putting direct pressure that's constant, where there's this intermittent kind of technique, or intermittent pressure is the thing that's actually sending an impulse to the nervous system. So it feels like to me that's something that is actually, it almost stimulates what's actually going on in the body. So it's a very different technique than if you were massaging somebody and there's a smooth muscle, deep tissue kind of like smooth way of going. But at the same time, I mean, I noticed on the Massachusetts Reflexology Association page, they just added the techniques. We did not have them when I was president. And I was actually a little taken back because I really feel like there's so much, reflexology is so much more than the techniques. So I say that, but at the same time, it's kind of like there's mystery behind it all. And when I do self-care, I'm not specific about the technique oftentimes. It's more about intention and actually being in the area. And people benefit still from it. It doesn't matter what kind of technique you use. So those are all my feelings around that. So
Really, really good. It's so, the word that comes to mind is healthy. This discussion is healthy, right? We have to have this conversation if we are to evolve, right? Really, really good. Really good. Okay. Heather says, I think it is good to learn the techniques, but to be aware of what feels good for you and for the people you work on. Yeah, it's simple. Yeah, simple and complex. Right? This is like, those of you who have taken my class with the no mind approach, right? We have to know what fills up our mind in order to let it go, right? We have to know the techniques in order to throw them away. We need that. That's a basic tenet of, well, of many different arts and sciences. We learn something so we can let it go. And if we're really off, we use it. Right? Intuition isn't working today. I'm just going to do the technique. That works fine. That's why we have technique. Is that it's there when we don't have other faculties present for us. Anyone else want to say anything or ask anything before we go on to the next bit of information? Yeah, Anne Marie.
Yeah, hi, I'm from the UK. Um, yes, the techniques I learnt and the rate and the routine that I learnt is nothing like my practice today. And I never know what I'm going to do until I've got the feet in front of me. And the techniques you spoke about, I think we evolve and make up our own sometimes, and just do what you're drawn to doing. And similarly, if I was to work on my own feet, I might not use the techniques. And using pebbles and foot rollers all have a really good effect too when I'm working on my own feet. So it's a really interesting question. So yeah, it's interesting because I've just been reflecting on how my practice has evolved and the techniques that I use aren't necessarily the techniques I was taught. It's interesting what you say, you have to learn the techniques so that you can throw them away.
Yeah, really, really good. Thank you. And I really appreciate that. That's the move. Those are the words that you said. I've been thinking about how my practice has changed. This is this critical mind, this soft critical mind. I think we have to take this through. I mean, this is our, well, who knows how many lives. This is a life. And while I'm here, how can I really kind of dig into this experience? I love that we can. Thank you so much. It's so good. It's a reminder for me too. How can I write about this? How can I think about my practice differently today? How have I changed? Thank you so much. Someone else said, I know that I had someone work on me and did the basic techniques, but didn't connect with me or my feet, and it didn't feel good to me, right? It felt technical and not personable. Absolutely. Yeah, this is where the techniques let us down. This is where the definition lets us down if we define reflexology by the techniques we use. Because if someone does reflexology and it's just very not systematic, is that's not the right word, and they're doing it in such a way where there's no connection, it might not have the same benefit. Yeah, this is a part of I would love, and I think it's very difficult to do this. Lori and I have talked about this before. Can there be a study where you have, somebody providing reflexology who is quite disconnected and is only giving the technique, and somebody that is personable and present and looking you in the eyes and you feel held and heard? How is that session going to be different? We might have to work on the same person. How would that study be measured? I mean, it's quite complicated, but it's something to think about. Really, really good. Yeah, I see Jan. Go ahead, Jan.
Well, I think that goes with everything though. People can do the same thing, whether it's a procedure, whether it's a technique, the conversation, even in psychology, or if you're going to a therapist. If you don't connect with that person, or that person is cold or just matter of fact, it's like, oh man, I mean, in the old days, doctors really did not have good bedside manners, but they probably were very good technicians at what they did. But, I want somebody who's personable. Well, no, so I'd rather have someone who's good at what they do and not personable if they're taking me to surgery. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. If you're going for a therapist, you want someone you can connect with, no matter what kind of therapy it is, because it's a human connection. So yeah, techniques, and as you said, my practice has changed totally, and I have no idea sometimes what I'm doing with my client. I'm just doing whatever I'm feeling that day. And then you get back from your client, oh my God, it was amazing. It was it. And then I go, oh, okay, I don't know what I did different, but okay.
Yeah.
So
This is where the magic happens, actually, where we depart, right? We step away. And I like that you talked about too. It depends on the practice. It depends on, right. I want the surgeon that's on, that didn't, that is connected and present and knows their stuff. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for, yeah, it's a differentiation of
yeah, I
practice.
want a dentist that knows what they're doing, not who's personable.
But both would be good too, right?
Well, it's a bonus if they're personable, but I really want, if you're cleaning my teeth and stuff, I want you to know what you're doing and not hurt me.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love it. Yep. All right. Really, really good. This is it. This is the conversation. Okay, good. And for those of you who came in late, we were just really exploring the definition of reflexology. Is it defined by the techniques we use? Would we just define it? And then we really started to go into, as people shared, the evolution of a practice. Okay, next, benefits of reflexology. All right. The benefits of reflexology are plentiful. By stimulating the reflexology points in your hands and feet, the body's natural healing process is set in motion. I'm going to read that again. The body's natural healing process is set in motion. This is something I believe very deeply, in that I am not a healer. It is not in my belief system to be a healer. It is not a desire I have to be a healer. I do not want to be a healer because I believe the person receiving the reflexology is the healer. And I don't want to rob them of that divine purpose, right? The divine purpose being to discover their healer within. I was listening to Alan Watts the other day, and actually when you were speaking, Jen, I thought of it as well. He says, I'm not a guru. If you know his work, he goes, I'm not a guru. I don't want members. I don't want disciples. And he thinks of himself, he says, I think of myself more like a physician than I do a clergyman. I don't want followers. I want to do the work and send you on your way better than when you came in, right? I want you may I help you along the way, but then you continue to learn how to heal thyself, as it were. back to the reading. The predominant benefits of reflexology are increased blood flow and circulation, reduce tension and stress in internal and external structures, and to eradicate toxins from the body. I have to think about this word. Eradicate, that would mean to completely eliminate. We don't do that. That's not true. But what is true, because this comes up, people ask, does it detoxify? Detoxification as such, detoxification occurs it can occur in different ways, but for our purposes today, detoxification occurs in parasympathetic states. Right? There was a study done with mice that when they slept, there was an increased amount of space between cells in their brain. There was a detoxification occurring at the level of the brain when they slept during a parasympathetic state, which is sleeping, right? So when a practitioner provides reflexology, they're guiding the client into that parasympathetic state. For those of you who don't know what that is, you could think of it like rest and digest. Right? It's when the body is at ease and therefore can heal itself. It's contrary to a sympathetic state, right? A sympathetic state is fight or flight. Okay, so by those terms, reflexology can be detoxifying. And that's actually what I would add to all of this. It can increase blood flow. It can reduce tension and stress for internal and external structures. Reflexology has been proven to help with certain conditions. More research is necessary, but some of those might be migraines, digestive disorders, PMS, hypertension, postoperative pain, sinus congestion, pain and anxiety associated with cancer and cancer treatments, and more. I'm going to move right into, and then I'll open it up again. So that's the benefits of reflexology in short. And now I want to move into how reflexology works, and then we'll open it up again. So how reflexology works. Reflexology points are located in the feet and hands. I really want you to continue to think about the words that I'm using. And as I use them, are they resonating? Or is there something you going, I don't know about that. That feels different for me. This is the important stuff, and write it down. This is, again, this is how I evolve. This is the evolution of our practice. There are also points on the ears and face and even micro maps all over the body. By applying pressure to these points, or a more apt description would be areas, we communicate with the inner body. Our goal is to strengthen the connectivity between our body's systems that may be out of balance or stagnant. Much like switching on a light, like we flip on a switch, we press on an area or a point, which sends a message through the elaborate circuitry, which is the human body, and back to the corresponding area. The reflexologist uses or may use manual techniques such as, and then I list a few that we talked about before: thumb, finger walking, hook and back up, rotation on the point. We can even add, right, Manzanares does a press and slide. That'll actually stay within the tissue. That could be another technique we add. And this pressure would communicate with the nervous system through these points. Next, in addition to the reflexology points, we also maybe being a word that is not true here, we also work with signaling receptors, pressure or nerve sensors located in the hands and feet. They're located all over our body, of course, but we're looking at the hands and feet right now. By stimulating these points, we induce a nerve response. Reflexology points, as well as the signaling receptors, send messages that travel from the points and receptors to the spinal cord, to the brain, and then back to each organ, area, gland, or system being worked on. The term reflexology point to me is limiting. It's not a point per se. To me, it is a receptor. It's receiving information that then is sent, processed, and a response occurs. So if I am to be more accurate, I am applying pressure to cells. Our body is composed of a trillion cells. We're just all cells. That's all that this is, right? We're applying pressure to cells that have receptors, protein molecules, right? These little receptors are just like antenna recepting, waiting for information, right? So those cells have receptors in or on the cell itself. These are cellular receptors. These receptors cover surface areas that house a smaller map of the body, what we call a reflexology map. These are sensory receptors, cellular receptors. My question for you, and what I believe, is this is what I'm communicating with. It's more true for me. A little bit more difficult to explain. It's much more easier to say reflexology. There are points and areas in your hands and feet that correspond to every part of your body by applying pressure, right? There are things that are easier to say, but if we're to be more accurate, what is it we're actually pressing on? We're pressing on cells that have receptors that take in that information and translate it or send that signal, that message through our central nervous system, spinal cord, brain. That information is gathered, processed, some stored potentially, depending on how we work, and then a response is sent back. So in reflexology, I am concerned with 3 sensory receptors that affect how I work with the client. There's mechanoreceptors. This is stimulated by changes in pressure or movement, right? Nociceptors, also known as pain receptors, nerve endings responsible for detecting changes in pressure that may cause damage to the tissue. And 3 proprioceptors. They detect changes from within the body as they relate to position and movement, as in proprioception. During a session, the mechanoreceptors respond to the pressure I apply, while the nociceptors, located all over the body, respond to the pain or potential pain. And then, since they are present in the hands and feet, we are mindful not to go beyond one's pain threshold so as not to stimulate a pain response. The proprioceptors react to changes in the internal environment as I stimulate the external points and areas in the hands and feet. And I'm going to read one more. I skipped a little bit, and I'm going to read one more paragraph at the end here. In reflexology, we are concerned with the sympathetic and parasympathetic states. I brought that up earlier. We live in a time where many people live in a constant state of fight or flight, sympathetic state. This causes excessive cortisol, aldosterone, epinephrine, or adrenaline, norepinephrine, or noradrenaline to be released, creating an environment, an internal environment where the body is unable to function easily. Our heart rate may increase, our digestion may slow, and we are ready to literally run or fight. The fight or flight response is necessary if someone is really in danger, but most of us enter this state with daily stress, whether it is in traffic, at home, or at work. While the body is a highly intelligent messaging system, the nervous system and the messages we rely on daily can be thrown off for a variety of reasons. Since reflexology induces a parasympathetic response, the technique can interrupt these stress patterns, giving the nervous system an opportunity to reset and help the mind and body to heal. All right, I want to open it up again. What are we thinking about this? So I talked about the benefits of reflexology, and I brought up this idea of what is it that we're doing as a practitioner, right? Are we playing a role? Is what we're doing making the change, or is it something within the client or friend or family member that is creating the change? That's a question. I brought up detoxification as part of the process, which sometimes is disputed. How reflexology works. I brought up connectivity, communication within the body. And then I want to hear if there's anybody that has an idea of this terminology we use. Reflexology point. What do you think about points, areas, receptors, sensors? What is your opinion or belief on that? Or what are you curious about with that? And I'd love to open it up and get your thoughts. I'm looking up at your little faces. I see Judy. Hi, Judy. So any ideas of what you think about reflexology point? Is it the practitioner or the client?
I don't use points. I mean, that's not a word I use. I use area. And I'm the general, this area or around this area. One of my clients ask stuff, so I can't say I use that word point.
Yeah. So area, so right, so the area then can be, right, it can be let me bring up do I have the map ready? Do.
Area,
Here.
this area.
Now, what about if you're referring to the foot? If you're like, I'm going to work on you would see you would say it as it reflects back to their body. You would put it in that way, in that terminology.
I would just say it's in this area. I wouldn't say this point of your, but I have a lot of clients that tell me where they feel it. So
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm feeling it here, and that's where I'm working. So, or I'm not working there. And it's like, oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
I
good.
do that too, Jan. I do it from the area, but the one exception is solar plexus. Because when I put my finger on a solar plexus on the foot, I can really feel either pulsation, resistance. It's so interesting because I've gotten to the point where I use it almost as an indicator as far as how stressed the body is based on what the pulse, what it feels like. If it sucks me in, like sometimes you can feel it sucking in, sometimes you can feel the resistance. It's really like, and I sit on it, but that's the only one that I use as a point. Otherwise, everything, and I don't tell the person either.
Yeah,
If somebody says, okay, what is that you're working on or whatever, I'll just say, oh, it's in this vicinity and it's, an area where there's a bunch of nerves that come together but I'm there. I try not to kind of lead on. I like using the area that you talked about, Jan, because there's so many things that can be contributing to what the client is feeling. So, but the solar plexus to me is the only area where I'm like, yeah, this is really interesting. And I've been really looking at that in my practice. So
So good. As you guys were talking, I was thinking too, everyone, if you are teaching a class on reflexology, and some of you are teachers, um, if you were to teach a class, how would you define reflexology? Right? So like a way to start a sentence could be, there are reflexology areas. Some people say reflexology points on your feet. They correspond to every part of your body. When I apply pressure, it sends the message via your nervous system to those areas within the body to have greater blood flow and relax. What is the definition if someone were to say, I want the definition? So your hands aren't on their feet. How do we describe reflexology to a student, to a person on an elevator, to a friend, to a potential client?
those are kind of two different questions, Chantel, for me. One is that as an educator, I'd probably just bring all the definitions that are out there and then allow the students to like you're doing, meld it together. And then the other one is that because I do work on ears, hands, and feet, it would be I work on ears, hands, and feet to help your body bring it into balance and for you to heal yourself. I mean, that's the simple, and then go from there if you get like more puzzled or whatever. But that's for me, that's the simplest. I try to facilitate your body. I mean, if they've told me they have something, then I may show them something in their ear that they can do easily or on their hand. Like I have headaches or whatever. So it kind of depends on who's asking the question.
Beautiful. And then for everybody too, if somebody asks, and this is again, just to either to respond to now, but also to write on and to consider when somebody says, well, how does it work? If you're working on my foot, how does that help my headache? How would you write that? How do you communicate that? And what's true for you, not just what we learned in school, what's true for you and your practice, like Jen was just saying, when I'm here, this is what I say and do. What is it that you say and do that feels true with where you are in your practice? There's and let me know if I'm frozen. My internet just got very slow. So let me know if you can hear me or see me. And then I'll read something from the chat as well. Can everybody hear and see me? I can see a frozen face is all I can see. Dun, 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 dun. All right, I'm going to read and trust that this is still going, and then you let me know if I need to read it again. I don't like the reference to a point either for a reflex, but I do find myself using it. Yeah. Talking about receptors is the area or zone feels better. Excellent. All right, I am totally frozen, so I am going to see. I'm going to go ahead and do something very radical, which is I'm going to switch my internet right now. So it may be that everything is fine on your end, but just for recording purposes, I'm going to do it. So we may come off very briefly and then back on again. Okay. All right. So hello, hello. I'm going to pause just a moment and wait till I kind of see movement again. Okay. All right. So for some, okay, so Michelle then says, one of the Michelles, we have a couple today. I use the word point when I'm referring to something small, like a hypothalamus or the gallbladder areas. Wonderful. Absolutely. Really, really good. Okay. Gosh, you guys are frozen, which is very, oh, there you are. I see Judy moving. That's a good sign. Okay. Maybe Judy, you could just tell me over the last maybe minute or so, was I frozen or did we lose or did you hear me? Your audio is coming through clearly also. Okay, good.
You were not frozen here for me, but I don't know about anybody else, Chantel. You were fine through all of that.
Thank you. So what might happen is in the video, it's my internet for the video might be a little frozen over that area. So I'm going to read two of the things that were said again, just for the video, and then I'll try to cut it out later. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Other two Michelles. Okay, so I'm just going to reread this one thing. Karina says, I don't like the reference to a point either for a reflex, but I do find myself using it. Talking about receptors in an area or zone feels better. Yeah. Michelle, one of the Michelles says, I use the word point when I'm referring to something small like a hypothalamus or a gallbladder area. Yes, okay. Really good. I do too. And then the other Michelle says your audio is coming through clearly. Okay, good. Keep me posted if anything falls through again with the internet. All right, anything else anybody wants to say about benefits or how reflexology works? All right, really good. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to read a little bit about history, but I'm going to keep it pretty brief because then I want to move on to mapping and opening it up again. So the history of reflexology, the oldest reference indicating that the feet and hands were used as a method for healing dates back to 2330 BCE in a tomb famously referred to as a physician's tomb in Egypt. So those of you who are reflexologists, we know this. It is often said, people will say, this is where reflexology began. This is the first indication of reflexology. To me, this is not so. This is an indication that healing can occur at the level of tending to feet and hands. That's where it stops for me. So in the tomb, there is a pictograph that illustrates a practitioner providing stimulus from their hands, specifically their left hand, to the patient's hands and feet. This pictorial representation contains 2 comments that read from the patient's perspective, "Do so. It will give strength anew, and do not let it be painful." The practitioner's response, "I do as you please." This has been translated in slightly different ways, depending on the translator, but all versions clearly state the sentiment above. The practitioner's response predates Greek physician Hippocrates, the medical advisement, "Do no harm." This is, as many of you know, known as the Hippocratic Oath, an ethical promise made by physicians and people working in the medical and healing industries, we can call it for want of a better word, when they enter these fields. This ancient Egyptian pictograph serves as an earliest depiction of caring for patients through the hands and feet. And I say patients only because it's a physician's tomb. We use different terminology here. And there's other pictographs in that tomb that illustrate other things like childbirth, embalming, dentistry, etc. We also see evidence of this care towards the feet, not reflexology. Again, for me, reflexology comes later. It's later developments when we really begin to see this mapping system emerge. So there is evidence in ancient China. I'm going to skip through a little bit of the different, examining foot method. We see it in a Chinese a physician in the Han dynasty. There is yeah, I'm going to skip all this because it's too much to process in verbal content right now. We definitely see it again in Japan's medicine teacher's temple at Nara in 790 AD. There's also statues of a reclining Buddha's hands and feet. Those are represented in many areas. We see the importance of feet and hand in areas of India, Syria, Persia, Greece, and also large paintings and small paintings, large sculptures in Hinduism and Buddhism. And you see them like these footprints of like a Hindu god, Vishnu, for instance. And these will display Sanskrit symbols sometimes, where we might represent reflexology areas. I go on to say, and this is something you've probably heard me say before, and if you're a reflexologist, we have this common belief, which is, reflexology is sometimes, mistaken as massage, or that it was developed as a physical modality, maybe by massage therapists. That is when I teach introductory classes to people who don't know anything about reflexology, I go, "What do you think reflexology is?" Everybody goes, "Foot massage." That's every single time someone says that, right? So there is this kind of misunderstanding. But on the contrary, it really was developed, reflexology as we know it today, by medical doctors, brain physicians, Nobel Prize winners. Like, it was a very different thing, right? And we see it first, or one of the first people is with Dr. William Fitzgerald, right? He was an ear, nose, and throat physician. We see, without going too much into the detail, we see this person dividing the body into vertical zones, right, within the hands, feet, and the entire body. We see Dr. Shelby later going, well, what if I actually were to do other zones? Not just longitudinal, but what if there's horizontal zones? And then we have Eunice Ingham going, well, what if it's all mapped out as such, if this is vertical and horizontal, this actually can be a replica of a larger body, and we can place that in the hands and feet. As reflexology evolves, it is key that we use a highly discerning eye and take a neurological approach. That is, reflexologists should have a knowledge of anatomy, functions of the organs and glands, diseases and disorders that affect the human body, which organs and glands are affected by these conditions, and a thorough understanding of how the nervous system works. All right. I have maybe I'll share this with you. Those of you who wrote me emails, I can share this. Admit. I can share this. I have a chronology of a lot of the key players in the development of reflexology. So I can share this. Maybe there's a way that I could share it on our Facebook group too. I'll find a way. All right, so I wanted to open up before we go into mapping, if there's anything anybody wanted to add about anything said so far since the beginning of class before we go into the last portion.
What book were you reading from?
It's my book. It's my book,
Yeah,
and
I just went on to try and find it, but I mean, I have your A to Z,
yeah.
you know, your booklet book, but what book is the one you're reading?
Yeah, so this book I started to
The
write.
published?
Was not published yet. I
Oh,
started.
okay.
Yeah. The books, I do have like 4 or 5 books out there. I have one on intuitive Reiki and integrative approach. That's out there in the world. That's on Amazon and on my website. The A to Z, I just recently, about a month and a half ago, took off because I'm looking at it again as I look at this book, the reflexology book, and I may be merging the two. And then it'll be in print instead of an ebook like the A to Z was. Yeah. Thank you for asking, Heather. Yeah, it makes it, you're like, what are you reading from? It makes total, it's hysterical. Yeah. Well, and also, this is the thing. And I find, I recently, one of my other books, Something New Every Day, Transformative Daily Self-Care Practices. I was looking, I sell it somewhere, and I was there the other day because I sign it and I leave it in this physical space. And I go, oh my God, I've changed so much since I've written this book. And one of the hardest things I find as somebody who commits words to a page is we change. My beliefs change, or like the quote I said at the very beginning of class, truth changes as men change, right? When truth becomes stable, men will become dead. I am evolving. So what does it mean to put something in print that that may have shifted for me? And Sandy says you're always using A to Z. Oh, yay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's going to come back in some form. I think it's going to come back in print though. Thanks for asking, Heather. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else before we go into mapping? All right. You know what I want to do before we go into mapping, just because I might lose you guys at the top of the hour. As I mentioned, we're going to go a little bit over. For those of you who have to leave right at the hour, I'm going to do a little self-care tool because that is such a huge part of what we do in our Facebook group together. And we've been talking a lot. We should do something. We should do something right now. So, and it's kind of it's kind of in line with what I was saying earlier about techniques, this idea that let's do something different, something that has felt really good for me, which is what I call a press and rock or a tilting method. And we're going to do it at the level of our fingers. So if you're a reflexologist or you have been in my classes before, we place the brain at the center location of every single finger. And so we're going to work with the thumbs today. There are different maps. This is going to lead us into mapping, right? So in mapping, this can be a brain, right? If the head is at the top and I'm in a fetal position, that head would be represented at the tips of my fingers or the fingerprints or the toe prints in my toes. That would be the brain. So if I place my hands together or my feet together, that would make up one brain, right? The right hemisphere, the left hemisphere, right? The right cortical and subcortical structures, my left.
Chantel, as you're doing that, there's fireworks going.
Are you serious?
Yes, there were.
I don't understand. Zoom has some. I figured this out the other day. If you do the heart thing, look at
Yeah,
that.
that's very cool.
Isn't that
Yeah.
so cool? Okay.
Yeah, so you should do it again because it was very cool.
This does fireworks right now.
Yeah, something that you were doing with it, with the movement. I don't know. It was doing it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there it goes.
So bizarre. This is the magic that is reflexology. Oh my goodness, I love it. Okay, so there may be fireworks. Warning, there may be fireworks. There may be love in the air. All right, so we can map something in that. If this is the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and we place it together, that would mean that my internal structures, those the subcortical structures, the center of my brain, are going to be residing between the two. So that would mean something like the pituitary or the pineal gland or the hypothalamus even is going to be right there. That's not how I map it. But I'll say this, that map's correct. There's no wrong. Right? Especially now you already know a little bit about my philosophy of one thinking and feeling into what makes sense for them. And then of course we're going to take it anatomically, physiologically. You know, we want to look at our physiology rather. We want to use those principles, but for me, I have found greater success when I divide the map. And this is kind of the replication or the subdivision of a thing, right? So for me, this can be a brain, but this can as well, right? Which means that this pituitary gland then moves central, and then the brain structures are here. And I'll show you a map in a little bit if there's time. Okay. So what we're going to do is this is my left hand, my thumb is up. I'm going to apply this thumbprint of my right thumb is going to hold the back side. And with my pointer finger, I'm going to apply pressure where the center of the swirl is, the fingerprint, or in reflexology land, this would be the pituitary reflexology area. When I apply pressure, it's just a nice, light, moderate pressure. I'm simply going to rock up. And then I'm going to rock down. And then I'm going to rock up. And let's just get used to that rocking up and down. So instead of, we're used to walking, right? We're used to doing this kind of thing. So I'm not going in that direction. I'm actually going side to side. I'm doing this, right? So I'm going up and down. I refer to this as going to 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So we place a little clock face on the thumbprint itself. In this way, if I wanted to detail the brain structures, I can then move to 12:30 and 6:30. 12:30 and 6:30. 1, I'm going to do a different angle, and 7, 2, and 8. I can go side by side, 3, 9, 3, 9. All right. So on a foot, I'm going up, down, or side, 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 side. I'm going to show you a video to illustrate this more. As I pull up that video, I want you just to continue to do the entirety of the clock, knowing that we're starting from a reflexology perspective at the level of the pituitary. As I rock up, I go into hypothalamus, thalamus. As I rock down, I go into the limbic structures. As I go side by side, I'm going into the temporal lobes, right, where there's the bilateral amygdala, or what we refer to as the amygdala, or the hippocampus. Right, so just explore in your own mind, in your own brain, that clock. And while you're doing that, if you've already finished, move on to another finger or the other thumb. I'm going to pull up a little video that shows you me doing it on someone's feet. Okay. So this is a lot of you have seen this video, and some of you know these feet. And if you're in the UK, you may also know these feet. So I call this sunbursting. I'm rocking up, up, and see how I'm supporting the back side. My hand is actually supporting that big toe, so I'm not distorting it in any kind of way. I'm rocking up into those cortical structures. And if I were to rock up further still, I would get into that like more that outer kind of gray matter area. But right now I'm just trying to detail all those. I'm detailing 3 o'clock, I'm detailing 9 o'clock. I'm rocking back and forth into those subcortical structures. And now I'm rocking up into the prefrontal cortex area. And here I would start to actually do some thumb walking across the top portion. Okay. I wanted to show you that because a lot of you are reflexologists or just people that might be working on someone's feet. So that might be good for you to see. So if you haven't already, go to the other finger. And of course, I'm showing you way up here, but if you do it in your lap, it's more just simple, right? It's just like this is like in my lap, and it's more like this. And this, and it's just in my lap. So it's a very easy gesture. You could even go on to other fingers. And if you get lost in any way, continuing to rock up into that 12 o'clock, 1, 2, and 3, switching your position or another finger, right? So if I'm doing this, I may have to switch to another finger. Whoop, how do I do this? If I'm here, say I'm here, here, here. If I do 4 o'clock, my body's going to distort. If it's in my lap, I'm going to have to do that. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it to my thumb because it's going to be in my lap. And now I can easily go to 4 o'clock. So now I can go to 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock, etc. Does that make sense? Explore it on your own because this is for my body. My body and my fingers make sense doing this sunbursting action at the level of my fingers, of the print and in the feet. But as you're doing it, when your body starts to distort, what do your hands and fingers want to do? All right. So mapping. I want to talk about mapping very briefly. This is really just a precursor to our next class together and a real jumping off point more fully into this idea, this belief system that we have to continue to evolve and continue to consider what we're doing, how we're doing it. And we have to move beyond what we've learned or what we've been taught and not just take it as correct. We have to think about what makes sense for us, given our studies, given our learning, given our intuition, what's next. So in mapping, the one thing I think about just first is what is a map, right? A map for me is something that I use to help me zoom in on an area I need to get to, right? So whether it's in my phone or it's a literal map, I'm going to zoom in on where I'm going and I'm going to figure out how to get there, right? I'm going to evaluate, I'm going to investigate. This is like a land map example, right? I'm going to investigate where I want to go. Ooh, do I want to stop off somewhere, right? I'm going to study it and become very familiar with it. And then I'm going to use it to navigate and maybe even assess. But ultimately, I'm going to utilize it so that I may follow the map. So a map is necessary in order for me to get from A to B. Now, I could also say it also isn't necessary. There is something about releasing the map, right? You think you've heard about the Camino de Santiago, right? That's a path. People have treaded a ground again and again, so it's clear the trail. You go on a hike, it's clear the trail. There is also something to be said about following a trail without analyzing or looking ahead, right? So that's also has much to do with how we wish to kind of prepare as we go into session or we go on a journey. So my mapping approach is threefold, has 3 components. The first is science. It's mathematics. It's anatomical. It's energetic. It's even of it related to cosmology or even atmospheric, because I'm going to consider layers. I'm going to consider how things replicate in biology and in nature. So in this way, it's going to be scientific, mathematical, and I may consider how things replicate. It's going to be philosophical. My belief system as it relates to those scientific processes or those scientific principles. And then finally, it's going to be artistic. It's going to be artistic because there's an artistic rendition. My belief system as it relates to those scientific principles, I have to take, it's my human attempt to capture that philosophy and mathematics inherent therein. And then it's my interpretation, how the science and philosophy intersect and how it becomes made manifest in a literal form. So those three things are present in mapping for me. How I have come to understand the principles of my life philosophically has a tremendous amount to do with my perceptions and my beliefs in what I refer to as a macro or micro theory, or what is referred to as a macro or micro level theory. So it's a concept. I did not invent it. It is commonly used or more often used in relation to economics or sociology. In the 1930s, a lot happened in the 1930s. We see really also Eunice Ingham. There's a lot that's going on as far as zone theorizing systems in the 1930s as well. But also in the 1930s, a Norwegian economist coined that term, right? Macroeconomics, if you've heard of that before, or microeconomics. So it's interesting. That's at the same time as this micro map development as well. So micro theories are important. They are sometimes referred to sociologically as action theories. Okay, so a macro theory larger is like it's narrative, right? Its scope is large, but in being large, it's also more difficult by virtue of its size. It's just more difficult to gather specific data or information. So me as a human being, this manifestation, I'm an action-driven individual, right? I become restless in conversations that don't ultimately lead to action, even though I'm such a ruminator, right? But I want action. So this is both a benefit and a drawback, right, to my personality. But a micro theory is very interesting to me because I relate to it. I relate to it because I'm able to gather the information. It makes so much more sense. It's just a little thing that I can grapple with. And I relate to it only so far as I can also attempt to understand the larger narrative. So if we're looking at this in respect to reflexology, is I can look at something on a micro level, but ultimately it's because I want to create or promote change within the larger organism or the larger scale object. So another way to think about it, this macro micro theory, is what is represented on a larger scale is also represented on a smaller scale. And depending on how deep I wish to go around a particular concept or experience will determine how I will look at it and how much I will ultimately get to understand about that thing I'm looking at. So the belief system, or this belief system rather, penetrates all my existence. Like it's personal too, right? So an example of macro and micro theory relates also to, I think it relates to multiplication. Simple multiplication, 1 + 1 = 2, right? 2 = 4. For instance, multiplication in a human experience would be, I smile at one person, and that one person can become two. Those two may contain within them the potentiality of more, and that probability is exponential. So, and what I mean by exponential is not like fast growing. It could be quite slow moving, right? It might take time at first. This has to do with the how, right? So if I smile at someone as I'm walking down the street, they might smile back, right? But it's my how also that matters. How I smile will have the potential for greater contagiousness if it is coming from a truthful, sincere place. So if I sincerely smile at somebody, there will be a greater probability of the recipient returning that smile to the initiator or to passing it on to someone else. Okay, so this is replication. This is multiplication. This is a piece to the puzzle of mapping. The belief system umbrella is also many spiritual systems, right? The belief that there cannot be peace on a larger scale until there's peace inside myself. How can there be peace on earth if there's not peace in me, right? How can there be peace within or between countries if there's not peace in my own family, in my own heart, right? So the smaller family is a smaller version of a larger extended family or a larger extended whole. And this can go further into, this can go further. So we see each other as separate, but in order to understand reflexology, for me, I have to see the connectivity. I have to see the interconnectivity between all things. I have to see the non-separateness. I have to see the whole organism. I'm just using a mini map to get there. So the fact that there are relationships between all parts of my body, just like there are relationships between all people, all countries, all planets, all stars, everything that lies even beyond, you know, the interstellar medium and intergalactic space and the HD, you know, like they're like all beyond the things that you may or may not even know. There are things that we haven't mapped yet, right? So all that is known and not known. In mapping, I consider those things. So I will consider the difference between perception and perspective, right? I can understand something by looking at a big picture, and I can understand something by looking at a smaller component that makes up a larger picture. That's an element to mapping for me. I consider fractal theory and chaos theory, or what will ultimately be shown in a Mandelbrot set. So when we do the map class, we were going to consider these options. The fractal theory is, you know, the simplest example in nature would be you have the tree trunk is one. You have two branches that are two. From this extends 4, from this extends 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 254, 512, right, into infinity. If so I have a limited idea of how far things can go. There's only so much I believe I can map. But a fractal theory suggests that this can go on for infinity. It also is set and bound within a certain body. And this is the Mandelbrot set too. Outside of that body is chaos, right? But if I have a tree, if I have a foot, if I have an object by which to place certain coordinates, I can then map something more specifically. So there's that. And the fractal theory also comes into play because you think of it like if something like there's the universe, and then there's a planet, and then there's a country, and then there's a state, and then there's a county, then there's a city, then there's a room, then there's a body, then there's half a body, then there's a hand, then there's one hand, there's one finger, there's one nail. And that can go on. This is where it becomes interesting, the conversation of finite versus infinite. But I believe a mapping system that is easy to access is one that is literally easy to access, which is going to be 2 hands or 2 feet. It's much more difficult for me to chart or map the details of a human body in a nail, although we see it with that wonderful woman who does the vertical reflexology and her nail representation, right? It's possible, and we see micromaps all over the body. We see it in iridology, sclerology, acumeridian. There are many external maps to detail internal structures. So that's another principle. Something else I explore is the infinity principle or the calculus principle. So infinity is, in order to understand infinity, I have to break it up into infinitely smaller pieces in order to understand the whole. This too has something to do with the map. And then we'll get into, oh good, I'll read yours in a second, Sandy, that's good. So, and then we get into a little bit of what I brought up at the beginning of class of Aristotle versus Newton versus Einstein, right? We move from finite to infinite systems. And what does that mean when we're considering the laws of the universe and what is actually possible in a mapping world? Anyway, I ponder all this. And as I consider all this, it really comes down for me thus far to potential and actual biological replications. So this is going to be the jumping off point when we consider mapping. Is what is like one of the questions will be, what do we see in nature? What are the replications we see? Where do we see it in nature? Where do we see it in biology? Where do we see it in human form? We certainly see it with cell division. So this will be part of our story, or this is part of my story in mapping. And I wanted to do that class as a way to explore concepts. And when I put it out there, we're going to give a little bit more information because I want everybody to come to the class really having sat with, meditated on, considered your belief systems, what you know to date, based on your learning, based on where you are, where you come from, what you believe, and beginning to find our own ways of mapping reflexologically and otherwise. And I'm going to read this. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Okay. So I learned from the beginning the map to the side. Yeah, however, after studying with you, I use both maps in great intention at different times. Yeah, you have my brain map. Yeah, I always think that was Sandy. I always think, if somebody has low back, lumbar region, coccyx even, I'll use my lumbar into the sacrum and coccyx area, which is placed up here. Whereas Anna Karenina will actually place it here. Whereas the Ingham map will place it here. There's slight deviations. So I feel like I have this idea based on my practice of what works best. But if somebody says they have something going on in that area, I will utilize various maps and I'll detail them thoroughly and I'll see what works in that moment. Yeah. Okay. I just said a lot of stuff. So I want to check in. I went out there a little bit. I may have gone out there a little bit. I know that my brain does that. That's my brain. I want to know if there's anything you have in your brain right now that you're thinking about, that you're considering, that makes sense, doesn't make sense, that you're curious about. Maybe something you wrote down that you're going to investigate later. What is it? What's in your mind right now as far as what we've talked about today? I see Sandy pressing buttons. One of the Sandys. There's two Sandys, two Michelles. Sandy O. But you're not, you're still muted. Darn it. You could also do the chat.
There we go.
Oh, good.
Hi. Okay. I hope this comes across clearly. You, in talking about everything just now, what jumped out at me was how you expressed how reflexology is interconnected and that our relationships, there's relationships with all parts of our body, right? I'm taking it out of context, of course, the interconnectivity with reflexology. I know it went beyond just the body. I understood that. However, I was thinking about your initial question in the beginning of class. Do we refer to reflexology as points? Do we just use a point? And reflexology, when I first learned way back, like it was expressed here, reflexology, you have your map, you go to this point for this, right? Which is, and you had said a no mind approach, which is brilliant. And I love that because when I work with clients, patients, I'm not just working one system. I may work with more than one system. And that's what I wanted to share because you had said the relationship with, we have all of our body is connected. You know, if I just do the circulatory system, well, you know, I may need to do the digestive system as well, and then the spinal reflex. So it's hard to explain, yet I won't just say, oh, I'm working on your chest. I may say, oh, this is the chest lung area. I know I'm going back to the beginning of class, but this kind of tied it together for me when you were speaking, as far as one of my approaches with working with reflexology, because I really take more of a holistic approach, and it is the intention. However, I will work with, you know, incorporate the nervous system, the lymphatic system, and a different system depending on what's going on with the client, and hopefully be a facilitator for them to do hitting those sensory nerve, the sense. I loved what you said, the sensory receptors. That's something new for me, with receptors in the feet, and I know I've been listening to some of your um, webinars, talks, and sharing. Thank you for that. Where it's just not a point or an area, it's truly connecting with those receptors, so that the individual can then process it. And when the body's relaxed, more systems function more optimally. That's my belief. However, it's working more than one system. So enough said. I think you got my gist, and maybe you could summarize, Chantel. Thank you for everything. I've learned a lot from you and appreciate it.
Oh, it's so good to see you, Sandy. Yeah, we've known each other now for a few years. It's real, or more than a few years. I don't even know how to count it anymore. Really, really good. This is yeah, this is the way. This is the conversation, right? It's one person says something, it sparks something, we reflect back, we take it, we remember what we do in practice. There's a word, it triggers something, it goes into this is just such it's just so good. Everything you just said is so good. Thank you so much. And I'm glad. You see, I'm going to be seeing you in Georgia for the Georgia class. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Oh, so good. Okay. And I know a couple of people are jumping off. Bye, Jan. Bye, Lori. So Sandy, can you explain? Oh, thank you. Bye, Jan. Sandy says, can you explain how one map can present in one area and may be sensitive for a client, but not sensitive on another map, but same area of concern? Can you explain how one map can present in one area, may be sensitive for a client, but not sensitive on another map? Okay, that's interesting. Do you mean, do you mean within the reflexological system? So like, for instance, the one map where the pituitary is here, the other map where the pituitary is here? Or are you speaking of a totally different map where maybe we see the pituitary gland reflected? That's a bad example though, because that one oftentimes is sensitive, and we want to be sensitive because it's an overachiever. So yeah, let's say the liver, for instance, a certain portion of the liver, that person comes in with an elevated liver, right? They have and they tell us that, and we are working at the level within what we call a reflexology map on the liver area, and we notice that there is a change in the tissue texture in the superior, maybe the upper portion, as it's kind of close to the diaphragm. We notice there's a change in the tissue texture there. We notice that they're experiencing discomfort or pain. They say it. Maybe there's a change in temperature, and we assess that there might be something going on at the level of the liver within our reflexology map on their hand or foot, say. And they say yes, they confirm it with the levels. But then perhaps, and tell me if this is what you're saying too, in the ear map, when we go to the liver, or in iridology, if they go to an iridologist, the liver doesn't reflect on that map. Is that what you mean? I'm saying a lot to understand. Oh, feet to hands, hands to feet. You probably wrote that while I was saying that whole long monologue. Okay, really, really good. Feet to hands, hands to feet. Really good question. Yeah. So the question is right. If somebody has an elevated liver, I see it reflected in the hand reflexology area, the upper portion, but not in the feet. I don't know. Jury's out. I have to think about that more. There's not an example that comes to mind. Generally, if I really work with mostly the feet. That's not to say I don't do hands and ears, but the information I get most accurately and the results I see are more through the feet. So I don't always compare. So I'm not the best person maybe for that question. Yeah. Anybody have anything to say about that relationship between hands and feet, if there's a difference? Not everybody, do people tend to do integrated sessions where they'll do like feet, hands, ears, or do people stay with just one map? And you could chat or say that aloud. Okay, so also, right, so for instance, one of my clients came in with hip pain. I worked the feet, but then with the face map, no sensitivity. So yeah, interesting. I don't know about the face map. For me, jury's out. I have yet to learn more about the face map. I've done one little class. I mean, I know very little about that. Hip pain, when I'm working with hands, when I do self-care, I do a lot of hand work. Client care, I do mostly feet work. Hips for me are reflected and more accurately assessed in the feet. It is just easier to read. If I'm trying to get the hip in my hands, it is just too difficult of a structure to isolate. That's a good question. Let's all think about that. Yeah. And you work integrative. Yeah, I would consider to ask that question in every session and see how it continues to land. And after every session, write down what you discover and when it does reflect in all maps and when it doesn't, especially if you work integrative, what a great possibility for you to discover when it does add up and when it doesn't. That's good, Sandy. Really, really good. We could do that with self-care too, all of us, right? If we have a hip thing, right? We could do it in our feet, we could do it in our hands, we could do it in our ear. So we can, I mean, this is who am I thinking of? Alexander technique. If anybody of you know Alexander technique, right? He had a problem in being able to open up his throat and express words, right? It was closing. So he developed a technique based on his body, on his self, to free up. He calls it primary control, the relationship between the sacrum and the cranium. How can I be so free that my throat can open and be more resonant, right? It was a position in his body, a moving position. Primary control is the baby moving on the floor who's very, very free. So it is from ourselves and our self-care that we can discover much of what we wish to learn. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else have any ideas, insights, or anything before we go into our evenings? Those of you in the UK. Anything you wish to say or questions you have? I just feel like you're going to do it, Anne Marie. I don't know why. I feel like.
So yes, I probably was mulling over a few things, and I think the most difficult thing for a learner is the differences in the charts, the differences in the maps. One map, an organ is here, and it's in a different place on another map, and I think that's really difficult. But it's interesting what you said when you spoke about the hip, and that you look at other maps and you kind of make a combination, if you like, or choose one that feels right, where you're getting the response. So, and that is how free a technique that I like to use. See what feels right, see what feels right for the client, and you kind of get there in the end.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I'm really thinking about, because our body is in layers and parts cross over. So we can't actually even say with complete affirmation that it is a bone, a muscle, an organ, right? It could be any layer of our cellular structure. Right. So is it the uterus or is it a certain aspect of that sacrum?
Mm.
And then there's also what they're getting, what we're feeling. Is there an intuitive hit that's like, this is at the level of the uterus, this is at the level of muscular structure, this is bone, this feels very surface, this, right? Can we tell through the depths of how we work? Is it the depths of how we perceive or think? It's an art. It is an art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. All right. We're gonna let's close on that. We can move into our day. It's almost 10:30, so we made it to almost 90 minutes. Thank you for coming today, everybody. I'm gonna put this out on I'll put it on the YouTube channel so it's easy to access, and also in our Facebook group. And those of you who aren't in the Facebook group, we use that really for it's for this. It's for the connection, for the communication. The video is a thing in and of itself, but this is really where I grow, is when I hear what you say, and when I hear myself say things, and how we learn together. So if you're not in that group, please join. I think you just joined, Emery, huh? I think so. Yeah, just yesterday. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll be able to do more live classes there. All right, everybody. Have a really beautiful day and a beautiful night. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Oh, thank you. Thank you.